Hello everybody, this is Scott LeBaron coming to you from Quantum Revolution Counseling. I'm here presenting another episode of the New Eyes podcast. So today I have a recording from a discussion group where Steve Treu introduces and interprets some of the Gospel of Thomas from the Gnostic Bible. I hope that you find this clip helpful on your spiritual journey. If you'd like to support us, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel or share this recording with others. We welcome your comments and any feedback that you might have. Please also visit our websites, qrcounseling.org and quantumrevolution.org. Thank you again for listening, everybody, and here is Steve.
The Gospel of Thomas. And when I go through the list of texts that I've read in my life that have had profound effects on me, rapid fire effects, I would say it's the Gospel of Thomas is in the top 3 for sure. Now the last chapter in the Gospels in the Bible, the last paragraph of John says, Jesus did much more than this. Were we to have written it all down, the world wouldn't have a library big enough to hold all the things that he did. It says something to that effect. And when I read that in the Bible, I took that as permission, if you will, to explore other texts. You go back 2,000 years when Jesus walked on earth and did his thing. You ended up having different types of people with different types of focus. One group of people looked at all the stuff that Jesus did, and they looked at it physically. And they assessed it physically, and they debated it physically, and then they judged each other physically. There was another group of people called the Gnostics. And what does the word gnosis mean? It means to know. There was another group of people called the Gnostics who took all of Jesus' his teachings and understood them spiritually. You can look at them physically, and you can look at them non-physically. You could do this with yourself again. You could look at yourself as physical. You could look at yourself as non-physical. Way back in the duality group, we said you could work on your abs and your hair. You can work on your pocketbook. You can work on your job, your family, your pet. You can work on all things physical. Or you can work on spiritual things. You can work on your patience. You can work on your compassion. You can work on your forgiveness. You can work on your mercy. You can work on your wisdom. Go learn how a car works, or go learn how your soul works. I mean, you get to pick. You get to decide. Well, the Gnostics developed this understanding when they read Jesus. They took it a different angle. They came to understand that they could come to know God directly. And so they interpreted the stuff that he said differently. They also weren't that focused on forcing other people to believe the way they saw it. It's one of my favorite Muhammad teachings when he says, there is no compulsion in religion. Truth stands out clear from error. The fact is, Muhammad said, you don't need to force your religion on anybody. And the Gnostics didn't feel like they needed to force it on anybody either. They just knew that they could develop a sense of a direct connection to God. Because gnosis is to just know. I describe thinking, believing, knowing, being as all of our process. We think there's a God, then we believe there's a God, then we know there's a God, then we become one with God. That's the process. Well, the Gnostics knew this. Buddha says you don't need a teacher, you don't need a book, you don't need anything else other than your own experience. It's sort of what the Gnostics were doing too. They used Christ's teaching to come to know God directly. That means you don't need an interpreter. You could experience it for yourself. That's how the Gnostics taught. You go back 1,500 years when the Bible was put together. What did I say the last paragraph John said? Oh, Jesus did a lot more, but we're not going to include it here because the book would be too thick. That's basically what it says. Go look it up for yourself. So the Gospel of Thomas ended up on the cutting room floor. Okay? The Gospel of Thomas was something that was deemed not worthy to make it into the Bible 1,500 years ago. I'm going to go through what I consider to be the juiciest verses with you. I'll let you interpret some of it. Of course, I will be interpreting a lot of it with you. And I like to point out, you don't have to see it the way I see it. But if you do, see if it rings a little bit truer, a little deeper. Does that strike a chord in you? Krishna says the Lord resides in your heart. Kabbalists say Israel is inside your heart. That's your direct connection to God. Apostle Paul says Christ is in you. Don't you know Christ is in you? I'm telling you right now, Christ is in you. And if you get that part of you tapped into, you feel the sense of spirit when you do, that's the purpose of reading this stuff. See if you can feel it a little deeper when we go through this. The Gospel of Thomas is 114 riddles. It's basically a dialogue between Jesus and Thomas. And what they're talking about is soul stuff, not flesh stuff. Now, when I go through it with you, I'll challenge you to look at it briefly physically and then look at it spiritually and see if there's a depth there that perhaps you didn't see before. Don't fear truth-seeking. Don't fear it. Just read it. Like I said to a guy the other day, I don't care if my neighbor's 5-year-old says something that's true. Truth is truth, no matter who said it. So I'm going to read these to you and see if it feels like truth to you. Number 1, Jesus said, whoever discovers the interpretations of these sayings will not taste death. Whoever discovers the interpretation of these sayings will not taste death. Straight up he's saying, all right, you got to figure this out. What does this stuff mean? Don't just take it on the surface and don't take some other guy's word for it. Figure it out. What does not tasting death mean? What a wonderful choice of words. Tasting death. Let's take that literally. What does it mean? To lick a corpse? Right? Tasting death. Why taste? It's a tangible experience. Death being something we're all afraid of. Jesus is saying here, if you understand what these 114 verses are telling you, you will not experience death like all those other physical people do. When you go to experience death, you'll be like, this is a roller coaster ride. I'm just leaving this carcass behind. It's not me. You will have already gotten rid of the ego. You'll know your spirit. You won't taste death. I think I say in the book, isn't that a marvelous idea? When you dive into this stuff and understand it on a deeper level, you won't taste death. So let's go for it. Number 2, Jesus said, those who seek should not stop seeking until they find. Seek until you find. Once you find, you will be disturbed. Disturbed. After you are disturbed, you will marvel. Then you will reign over all. And finally, you will rest. I call this the 6-step process to get to heaven. Okay? First seek, but don't stop seeking until you find. Once you find, you'll be disturbed. After you're disturbed, you'll marvel. Then you will reign over all, and finally you will rest. If you just remember this, you've got the Gospel of Thomas wrapped up in a nutshell. Seek and you shall find is very biblical. We've all heard that before. I'm like, why did they stop there? The rest of this is wonderful. Seek and you shall find. Once you do find, you'll be disturbed. Now this works in so many different ways. Whatever you seek, you eventually find. Go ahead and seek ego functioning. Okay? Seek the greatest physical world possible. And as you do that, what happens along the way? You experience pain and suffering and frustration and some success. You experience that. But eventually that's disturbing to you because it's not fulfilling. You go ahead and find flesh stuff, you're going to eventually be disturbed. Guess what you do? You go back and seek again. I got to find another path. I always use drug use because it's the simplest way to illustrate this stuff. Seek drugs, you'll find drugs. And guess what ends up happening to you? You end up disturbed. I've never been anybody who's used drugs so long they say, I've mastered it. Now I'm in a good place with this. Everybody ends up saying, no, I got to do it different. And they keep seeking. Eventually they find I need to seek a different pathway, which is the spiritual pathway. This is true for all forms of dysfunction on the face of the earth, not just drugs. Eventually you get to a point where you say, there's got to be something else. Oh, by the way, that's what Tom Brady said after winning his 3 Super Bowls. He says, there must be more to life than this. Aaron Rodgers said the same thing. The fact is, eventually you say, there's something more than winning Super Bowls going on here. Sure enough, there is. Now, it's a disturbing quality until you figure out what it is. Back in the Gita group, we were talking about lucidity. It's the same thing. Once you go through and find lucidity, he says it's like poison for a while. That's because for a while, first of all, everybody else thinks you're nuts. Buddha said the first year after his enlightenment, he didn't want to teach because everybody told him he was crazy. Muhammad, upon all his revelations, said he felt like his heart was being torn out of his body and his limbs were being ripped off. Then his wife had to settle him down and said, you're not crazy, I think you're a prophet. Okay? The fact is, to get all this spiritual stuff, it's disturbing. You have to look at the world differently. You have to reset and stop looking at the ego part of self and look at the spiritual part of self. The whole time, everybody else is calling you names, most likely, because it looks like you're a different person altogether. So yeah, it's a disturbing phase. But he says, after that you will marvel, because you're not going to turn back. Once you found spiritual truth, you're not going to turn back and go be more ego. You're going to stick with it. And then the marveling comes. Once you start to realize what's really going on here, just the mere concept that nothing dies, that we just change form, that's marvelous right there. You start to develop this sense of, you mean all this crap that I've been through in my life actually had a purpose and a meaning? There's a method to this madness. Group 2, organized chaos. We've all experienced the chaos, right? Well, there's an organized quality behind all of it. That's marvelous, isn't it? You mean the loved ones that have passed, I will see them again? That's marvelous. You mean I could be freed from this pain and suffering just by forgiving and showing mercy? That's marvelous. I mean, it goes on and on. It's a marvelous phase. Got to go through this first, though. What happens after you've marveled for a while? Reign over all. This means you'll be elected president, right? No, that'd be more ego thinking. This means that you're going to make your first million. No, that's ego thinking. What does reign over all mean? What are you reigning over? Well, you reign over the ego part. The soul is reigning over it. Right? Now you've tamed the beast that's inside of you. The thing that tells you to do all the dysfunctional things, the cravings for the negative things, the resentment towards others, the fears that you have. You're reigning over all of that now. You're the quote-unquote God of your own kingdom. This does not mean you get elected president. This does not mean you're going to make a million or a billion. It might mean that. It just doesn't matter. You will reign over all because you will have quote-unquote resurrected yourself. You will have gone up into the spiritual world, and now you have control over yourself. You are now a free will spirit, and you're not controlled by all the ego dynamics of the world. And after he says you will rest. This is nirvana. That's heaven. That's the heroin high. The thing that people go for, circumventing all this stuff, is to go after the rest. That good feeling, drinking and using drugs, or satisfying oneself with Super Bowls and sex and money and all that stuff, all the ego things that we use to calm ourselves, all that stuff, in a word, he says rest. You could go after it physically, good luck with that, or you could go after it spiritually, and here's the pathway. This whole thing is a process. Having learned this, I know that everybody in the world's on that journey. We're just at different phases. 6 steps. People are either seeking flesh. When I see that they're seeking flesh stuff, I know that they're headed for some bumpy roads ahead. Okay? Other people have found what they're looking for. Sometimes it's flesh. I still know they're for bumpy roads ahead. They're going for bumpy roads ahead. Others have found spirit. But I know it's like a cocoon. When a caterpillar turns into a butterfly, it's a gooey mess for a while, right? Just because you found spirit doesn't mean you're done. Just because you've tapped into, you've said this before, sometimes you don't like yourself that much anymore when you find yourself looking at the world spiritually. Because you look at all the stuff that you've been through, all the stuff you've done, and you're like, oh. Later on in this text, he says something like, oh, the shame and the guilt that you will bear. When you start to look at it spiritually. But that's just a phase. You're going to move through the rest of it. Number 3, Jesus said, if your leaders say to you, look, the Father's kingdom is in the sky, then the birds of the sky will precede you. I love doing this. I've done thousands of groups. Everybody point to heaven, please. Point. So if I got on a spaceship and I traveled up, would I run into the bottom of heaven? Listen to how Jesus basically mocks it. If your leaders say to you, look, the Father's kingdom is in the sky, then the birds of the sky precede you. Okay? He's mocking the idea that heaven is up. It doesn't make any sense anyways. And yet that's how people think. Heaven's up. Then he says, if they say to you it's in the sea, the fish will precede you. Rather, the Father's kingdom is within you. Also in the Bible. What is he saying here? Deeper, don't look up, don't look out, look within. When you know yourself, then you will be known, and you will know that you are a child of the living Father. But if you do not know yourself, then you live in poverty, and you are the poverty. So, we've got the soul aspect of self and the flesh aspect of self. Which one do you think you are? If you think I'm male, I'm white, I'm a Western Pennsylvanian, I'm a Steeler fan, I don't know myself. That's conditioning. That's robot talk. I don't know myself. I'm the consciousness, I'm the soul that resides inside that costume. And notice the difference. When you know yourself, then you will be known, and you will understand that you are a child of the living Father. You are a soul that's wearing a costume. And the features of that costume are the male, female, white, black, tall, short, gay, straight, Republican, Democrat, all that kind of stuff. But it's not what you are. What you are is that soul essence that's inside that costume. So I'll read it again. When you know yourself, then you'll be known, and you will understand you are a child of a living Father. So who's the child of the living Father? The soul or the body? When Jesus loves all the little children, he's talking about all the little souls. Now, I'm sure he loves all the toddlers of the world too, but he loves the soul part of them. If you don't know yourself, then you live in poverty, and you are the poverty. See, back when we talked about the Beatitudes in the Sermon on the Mount, we talked about how when he's talking about poor, he's not talking about physical money poor. He's talking about spiritually poor or ego poor. It's not always about money. When he says you live in poverty because you think you're flesh, what's poverty? It's when you don't have the Spirit in you. If you don't know yourself, you're going to be financially broke. Is that Jesus' wise advice? If you think you're an ego, then you're going to be physically poor. Now, that doesn't make sense because most egos I know who are working on physical riches get more money because that's what they're going for. And Jesus is saying, no, they're poor. Again, he's thinking spiritually. You live in poverty and you are the poverty. That's because you bought into the idea that you're a physical being. What does the word Buddha mean? Wake up. To wake up is to realize that you're this soul, you're this consciousness, and now you're rich. Now you're rich in spirit. Number 5, know what is in front of your face, and what is being hidden will be disclosed to you. For there is nothing hidden that will not be revealed. Know what is in front of your face. Is it all these bodies I'm looking at? I'll talk to my wife. If I look at her and I go, "Hi, Kristen," there's my wife. Now that's true on a certain level, right? But what's really in front of my face? There's a soul sitting there. And if I know that, all the mysteries are revealed to you. This whole process of marveling, reigning, and rest, once you get through the disturbing idea of seeing the world physically, because that's what it is, when you look at the world physically, pain and suffering ensue. Buddha's first noble truth. You're here, you're going to suffer, because you're attached to all this stuff. But when you can get through this idea, now I can have this experience of my wife sitting there, and she's a soul sitting there. And I put it in the right order. She's a soul who happens to be wearing this costume. It's a very nice costume. But when I look at it correctly, what is in front of your face, when I know what's in front of my face, what is hidden will be disclosed. That's all the mysteries of the kingdom. This is also in the Bible. Jesus says, when you understand, Matthew 10:13, 13:10, one of those two. And he says, I speak in parables because I'm trying to help you understand what those mysteries are. Some people get it, some people don't. The people that get it are the ones who see it spiritually. The people who don't get it see it physically. And if you see it spiritually, all the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven will be revealed to you, including the fact that you can't die. At the end of this story, when Jesus goes to the cross, he knew all the mysteries. The Christ that was inside of him reveals all the mysteries, and he's like, oh my gosh, I can't die. This body's just an illusion. Physically speaking, we're just transferring energy into another dimension. Jesus knew this. And then he had to go show it to us. You look at it physically, you see this guy getting crucified on the cross. You look at it spiritually, you see this guy knowing what the truth is, knowing that he's transferring and he's not actually dying, he's coming to life. Number 6, his disciples asked him and said to him, do you want us to fast? How should we pray? Should we give to charity? What diet should we observe? And Jesus said, don't lie, don't do what you hate, because all things are disclosed before heaven. Now, the disciples are asking in a way that I think gives it away. They're looking at it physically. What is fasting in the physical world? Not eating, okay? What is fasting in the spiritual world? It's not eating ego, okay? It's not consuming the flesh. When you look at it physically, it's God will be happy with me if I starve myself for 30 hours. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad idea. There's value in that. The discipline that's required when it comes to physical fasting. Except Jesus says, don't lie and don't do what you hate. So if you're fasting and you're like, man, I could really, really wish I could have a cheeseburger right now. Jesus is like, you're wasting your time, okay? What diet should we observe? How should we pray? And should we give to charity? Don't lie and do what you hate. If you, out of obligation, give $100 to the church, Jesus is saying, don't do that. Don't do it out of obligation. Because it is disclosed before heaven. God knows why you're doing what you're doing. You do too. And if your motivation is wrong, if you're doing it because you feel guilty because other human beings might know how much money you're giving or not giving, then you're not doing it for the spiritual purposes. But if you're doing it with good spiritual intent, you would look at this stuff different. What is charity? What is real giving?
Spirit.
Yes, it's the giving of the Spirit to each other. That sometimes comes with money, but money sometimes is fraught with guilt and resentment and pity and shame and all that kind of stuff. But if you give the Spirit, Spirit is pure. And Jesus wants you to be working on giving that type of charity. Don't do it if you hate it. If you're Spirit, you're going to like it. You're going to look forward to doing it. All right, just one, think deep. Jesus said, lucky is the lion that the human eats, so that the lion becomes human. And foul is the human that the lion eats, and the lion still becomes human. Lucky is the lion that the human will eat. So almost every spiritual text, a beast isn't really a physical thing. What is the actual beast in spiritual texts? It's the ego. So when you see lion, and once you learn how to do spiritual linguistics, you see the word lion, what should you think? Ego. So let's read that again. Lucky is the lion that the human will eat, and the lion becomes human. What does that mean? So here you are, there's the human. And if you consume the lion, first is the lion that the human will eat. If you consume it, what happens? Ego enters you. And the ego gets to be human. Just change it to the devil. You start consuming the physical world and you make your life about the physical world, what happens to you? The ego gets to live itself out inside of you, its host. The devil moves into you, if you will. And so it's lucky because the lion gets to become human because you consumed it. I decided to eat all this ego stuff. Gee, flesh world, satisfy me. And if you consume the flesh world stuff, and this is on any level, you're going to become, you just allowed the ego to become human. Foul is the human that the lion will eat, and the lion still becomes human. Foul is the human that the lion eats. Does a lion, the beast, sometimes eat people? Well, guess what consumes us more than anything else? The ego. That's the ultimate killer. So now it'll turn the tables. You were eating it for a while, now it's going to eat you. And once the ego consumes you, because the beast, once you let it in, it's going to eat you from within. I must be better than that person. Or I'm worse than that person. That's ego either way. If I have to beat a guy in competition, or if I lose to him, either way, I'm evaluating myself on an ego level. All fears, all resentments, all issues in the physical world stem from this type of thinking. I wish things were different. I wish you hadn't done that to me. I wish I'd done that in the past. Whatever, all these physical things. Now the lion has consumed you, and it still becomes human. The only thing he didn't mention in this little phrase is the word spirit. Okay? He's talking about how these two things will dance with each other. And if what you do is consume it, it will win. And if it consumes you, it will win. Either way, the ego's going to win. Number 8, Jesus said, the person is like a wise fisherman who cast his net into the sea, and he drew it up from the sea full of little fish. Among them, the wise fisherman discovered a fine large fish. He threw all the little fish back into the sea, and he easily chose the large fish. Anyone here with 2 good ears had better listen. Now please try to take this physically. Is it good fishing advice? Jesus says, cast your net into the sea, and you're going to pull up a bunch of fish. The wise man will choose the big fish. That's great fishing advice, right? If you're a fisherman, you want the big fish. Nobody puts up the little minnow and says, look at this giant fish I caught. No, the big fish is what you're looking for. It's great fishing advice. And sometimes he's referring to physical world stuff. Works great. Although in the end he says, anyone here with 2 good ears had better listen. So I guess hearing impaired people don't have to pay attention to this, right? If you can't hear, then you don't need to understand what he's talking about. No, he's not talking about that. Again, he's talking about soul ears. All right, your soul needs to hear this. That's the 2 good ears he's talking about. What is he talking about? This isn't a fishing example. The person is like a wise fisherman who casts his net into the sea and he pulls up a lot of fish. And the wise fisherman discovers a fine large fish. So if you, this thing, which has been consuming ego, instead comes up with a fine large fish, we're going to do 2 examples of what a fine large fish could be. What do you think a fine large fish means, spiritually speaking? Consciousness is like an ocean, and fish are the things that swim around in there. We're talking about your head here. We're talking about big ideas and big thoughts and big healing things. The fine large fish swimming around inside your head. Don't hold on to the stupid little ones, all those annoying nagging thoughts that you have going on upside there. Pay attention to the big ones and hold on to it. An example. You're sitting in traffic and you're totally annoyed and that guy over there is bugging you because he's playing his music too loud and somebody's on your tail behind you and you're annoyed. Little fish. And then all of a sudden you have this idea, I can't do anything about this, maybe I'll just sit here and be patient. That's a fine large fish, isn't it? And he says, easily choose the large fish. You want to spend all your life worrying about stuff you can't control? Go for that. They're all little fish. Or pick a big fish, which is acceptance. That works. Another way this works. How many people do you have in your life? Hundreds, if not thousands. And how many of them are like annoying ego minnows swimming around? And then you come across people, some of them who are larger because they're more developed. All it means is more developed. Somebody who's more spiritually developed, what should you do? Hold on to that person, right? You probably have neighbors and friends and family members and they're all different levels. The whole point is hold on to the big fish. Who's the biggest fish of all? Isn't that a mirror on the wall kind of thing? Who's the biggest fish of them all? Who's the biggest fish of them all? Yeah, here's the biggest fish. Hold on to the biggest fish. That's our collective goal here, right? The whole Christ consciousness is, I want to think like that guy thinks. I don't need to think like all these other people, all the little fish that are creating stress inside of me, all the arguing that's going on in the world. Think like Christ and see if that doesn't work better for you. Easily choose the large fish. Anyone here with 2 good ears had better listen. Sure makes better sense than taking this as straight up fishing advice, right? Number 10, I have cast fire upon the world and I am guarding it till it blazes. Again, these are riddles. There's no way he's talking about physical stuff. I've cast fire upon the world. What is he, an arsonist? Right? And he's guarding his fire until it catches fire. No, what's he talking about? The fire is the Spirit, right? It's the Holy Spirit. And he's cast fire. What does that mean? Jesus said he was the light of the world. What is he doing? He's taking that light like a fire starter, and he's spreading it to you, and he's spreading it to you, he's spreading it to you. He's guarding it because Jesus tends to this. The Christ, which is here in this room, is a light. It's inside of each one of us. Think of it as the pilot light in your gas stove at home. What if the pilot light goes out? Is there ever going to be any cooking? Right? All of us have a pilot light. You have a pilot light. How do you turn the heat up with the pilot light?
More gas.
More gas. Okay? That's it. It's also the big fish. But you have to add the fuel. And when you do, it grows and you have more heat. He's guarding it till it blazes. See, we're in this time period in humanity where it's starting to blaze. That's why you're all sitting here listening to this. It's starting to blaze. You should be able to feel that fire inside of you growing a little bit. Because it started out as a point. In Kabbalah, they call it the point. And then it grows and it grows and it grows and it grows and it grows until it becomes the Christ. Paul says, I must decrease so he may increase. I must decrease is the ego must decrease so he, the Christ, increases. It's the fire and it's blazing and he's guarding it and it's going to burn inside you. This heaven will pass away, and the one above it will pass away. Now, if you've gone with me through this whole series, you understand that there's, in quantum physics, how many dimensions in quantum physics? A lot more than what we think. Jesus says this heaven will pass away and the one above it will pass away. Well, that's interesting. He's sort of describing different levels of heaven. So one way I think of it is, when we're here on earth and you work on all this Christ stuff, the authentic Christ stuff inside yourself, what will this earth feel like to you? More heavenly, right? Buddha himself, at the end of his life, said, this place is so beautiful, I don't want to die, but it's time for me to go. He says, I could live another 100 years, but it's time for me to go. Well, if you establish Christ inside yourself, you experience heaven right here on earth. And then what happens? You'll die and you'll go to this other heaven. This one will pass away, the one above it will pass away. It's like grade school. First grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade. There's like many different degrees to this. This is no one-shot deal here. This whole thing is a process of development and growth. Please, Luke 2:52, look it up. It's one of my favorite lines in the Bible. Jesus grew in stature and in favor with God. Jesus grew in stature. He was growing. It's like he went from third grade to fourth grade to fifth grade too. So are you. This heaven will pass away, that one will pass away. You're going to get through high school, then you're going to get through college. That's how that's going to go, spiritually speaking. Jesus said to them, if you fast, you will bring sin upon yourselves, and if you pray, you will be condemned, and if you give to charity, you will harm your spirits. We addressed this before. If you look at that physically, if you give to charity, you will harm your spirits. Now, this is one reason why 1,500 years ago, people would have sit around saying, wait a minute, I don't want this in the Bible. That doesn't make sense. Of course you should give to charity. He's talking spirit again. If you're giving to charity because you're looking at somebody and you're saying, oh man, I feel bad for you. This is a bad situation you're in. You're not trusting God. Does God screw anybody over? I've asked this question thousands of times, and everybody says the same thing. God doesn't screw anybody over. So why would you feel bad for the other guy? It says in Genesis, do not eat off the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Buddha emphasizes no good or bad. The fact is, nobody's going through anything that isn't part of their treatment plan for their own spiritual development. And Jesus says, if you give to charity, you will harm your spirits. Now, that's looking at it from the flesh point of view. He's saying you can't be doing it that way. Of course you should be giving of the Spirit. That's what you need to do. And if you also decide to give $100 or $5,000, that's great. Just make sure it's spiritual and not ego. Big difference. Entanglement is about the exchanging of energies. And if all we're doing is exchanging negative, low-level, dark inertia or passion energy, we're not going to get anywhere. I trust in God as the spiritual source of everything, and I trust that there's a God that's inside you as well. He's guiding you too. Oh, and by the way, here's $100. See, that's how it works. But not, sucks to be you, here's $100. Big difference there. When you go into any region and walk about in the countryside, when people take you in, eat what they serve you and heal the sick among them. After all, what goes into your mouth does not defile you. It's what comes out of your mouth that defiles you. Physical? When you go into the countryside, eat what people have to serve you. Well, for sure, if you're going out and about and you go visit your friends and they're going to serve you dinner and they give you pork chops, you probably shouldn't ask for, pizza instead. Okay? Is he giving physical advice here, or is he saying something else? Eating in the physical world is putting substances into your face. Okay? In the spiritual world, what is eating? The whole idea is, when Jesus fed the masses, he fed them a big dose of spirit. Not ego, he fed them spirit. Maybe he gave them fish and bread too. There's no doubt, I don't have a problem with that. But on the deeper level, he's saying when you go into the countryside, and by the way, earth is the countryside, because your home is heaven. You're a soul that came by this way. And later on, he calls you a passerby. You came here. The countryside, it's also in the Bible this way. Read when he talks about going out into the land in the countryside. It means coming into the world of flesh. When you go into the countryside, when people take you in, eat what they serve you, and then heal the sick among them. That means if Scott gives me a big bag of ego, I should do what? Gobble it up. Eat what he serves me, and then heal the sick among them. What goes into your mouth doesn't defile you, because if he forces ego on me, which is his resentment and his fear and his impatience, if he forces that on me, That doesn't defile me. What defiles me, he says, is what comes out of your mouth. Which is to say, if Scott gives me a big bag of ego, and I give him a big bag of ego back, now I'm defiled. Jesus took on the sins of the world. It's exactly what this means. He absorbed everybody's energy. Everybody judged him in a certain way. And he took it all. And he knew that he was the Son of God. He knew this. And he wasn't going to worry about your little petty judgments. It's okay if you're resenting. It's okay if you're impatient. For with him, he would just absorb it. Now, when you're not as spiritually developed, you will experience somebody else's impatience and it'll stress you out. And he's saying, to be a spiritual being, you want to absorb the other person's stuff. Eat what they have to serve you. Maybe the pork chops too. There's laws, but on the level of spirit, the soul is to take in the energy of another and purify it. That's what he did. You give me energy, you give me ego energy, I'll give you the Holy Spirit. Right? That's how you heal the sick among them. If you give me resentment and I give you resentment, who's gotten healed? You give me resentment and I give you forgiveness, now I can heal you. When you see one, this is number 15, when you see one who was not born of woman fall on your faces and worship, that one is your father. Now again, he's making this so super clear. You're each of you born of a woman physically. He says, when you see one who is not born of a woman, fall on your faces and worship. Well, what was not born of a woman? That soul part of yourself wasn't born of a woman. That's your Father. That's the higher consciousness. That's the Christ in you. That's God, all that kind of stuff. That's what you're supposed to be worshiping, not the flesh self. All these physical beings are born of woman. You're supposed to notice which part of you was not born of the woman. So all of us have different mothers. But we all have the same Father, don't we? We have the spiritual Father, the same exact thing. And that's what you're supposed to fall down and worship. Stop worshiping the flesh. Number 16, this is also in the Bible. It's Matthew 10:34. Again, 75% of these are in the Bible, just written different. And I like the way these are riddles. Number 16, perhaps people think that I've come to cast peace upon the world. They do not know that I have not come to cast peace, but conflicts upon the world. In the Bible it says, I've come to bring a sword. Okay? What does it mean to cast not peace, but conflict upon the world? See, we just did this whole thing on the Gita, and in it, Krishna says the whole world's a war. The war is between you and you, inside your head. And here comes Christ coming down into this physical world in your cushy little ego mind. And you think it's you and the ego, and you're supposed to be doing a physical thing, and look at me, God, aren't you impressed with all my behaviors? And Jesus comes down and wants to mess all that up. He wants to cause conflict. Would you stop thinking of yourself that way? Poke, 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 and he starts to say, you're different. You're a soul. You're not this flesh being. In this mess somewhere here, the whole fine disturbed thing, he's coming to get you to that point. Here's the conflict. He wants you to be disturbed. He wants you to look at yourself as different than what you've been looking at yourself. He doesn't want you to think of yourself as a white American male. He doesn't even want you to think of yourself as Christian. He never said that. He did say, I am the way and the truth and life. Nobody gets to the Father but by me. And that's done as Christ. Not done as following the man Jesus. It's done as following the Christ inside each one of us. You follow the Christ inside of you, you'll get to the Father. There's the essence of Gnosticism. Wake up the Christ inside you, you're good to go. That's all it is. So he's coming down to cast fire upon the world. He's coming down to cast conflict upon the world. He wants there to be difficulty. And have you ever experienced difficulty? Yes. Chapter 2. Chaos, right? It's inherent in this world. You're supposed to experience it. And Jesus says, good. That's what you're supposed to experience. The only way out of that is to look at it through the lens of Christ. Otherwise, you're going to keep spiraling around in the world of the ego. The disciples said to Jesus, number 18, disciples said to Jesus, tell us, how will our end come? And Jesus said, have you found the beginning then that you're looking for the end? You see, the end will be where the beginning is. There's a fun riddle. How will the end come? When you're 85 years old, a lightning bolt is going to strike you on the head and then you'll die. There. Is that what they wanted to know? Now he says, have you found the beginning that you're already asking for the end? When you see, the end will be where the beginning is. What the heck does that mean? How did you get into this world? If you think physically, it's sperm and egg getting together producing you. Okay? Well, you are not the physical being. You are the spiritual being. So how does it get into the world? Go way back to these chapters in which you talked about the quantum physics, E equals mc squared, and string theory, and the God particle, and all that kind of stuff. There is a threshold where spirit or energy becomes mass and matter. And when the soul part of you moves across that threshold, you take on a body. At that point, you've come into the world. That's also the exit door. When you see the beginning, which is as a spirit, you come in here, you experience all this physical stuff, you also see the end, which is as a spirit. Paul says the same thing in the Bible. Are you so foolish to believe that you're going to begin as spirit and end as flesh? That's a Bible line. We come in as spirit, and then we think we're going to succeed by being physical. Look at me, God. Look at all the stuff that I did or didn't do. You're going to grade me on my physical stuff? And Paul rolls his eyes and says that's not what it is. And Jesus says, if you found the beginning and the end and you know them to be the same, it's because you started out as this and you're going to end up as this. The whole thing, I compare it to Houdini. If Houdini, great escape artist that he was, came in here right now and he stood before you and he put on a shoelace around his wrists and said, watch me get out of this, would you be impressed? No. You want the guy shackled and chained and handcuffed and dunked upside down in a tank of water, and then you'll be impressed, right? Well, all that shackling and the chains and the dunking inside the water is the human ego. And your soul comes into this world and it gets shackled by ego, and then you're supposed to de-shackle, wake up, figure out that you're a soul in the first place, and now you realize the beginning and end are the same. You entered across that threshold, you're going to leave across that threshold, but you're only going to do it when you know the kingdom of heaven is inside of you. And you're not going to do it in the flesh, ever, 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 never in the flesh. Congratulations to the one who came into being before coming into being. It's a variation on the same thing. Congratulations to the one who comes into being before coming into being. What does that mean? When this thing dies, you're going to find out pretty quick that that's what you are. Because no longer will you have a body. And you will cross that threshold and you'll be like, wait, where's my hands? Where's my head? Where's my family? And you'll be experiencing the other side. And if you didn't spend any time figuring that out, you're going to be dazed and confused. But congratulations to the one who figures that out while they're still here. You want to wait till you die to go figure that out? No, do it while you're right here. Then death will be fun. You'll cross the threshold, you'll know what to do. You just entered another playground, you'll know what to do. You'll have your fast pass, right around and all the other universal rides. But if you're dazed and confused, you're going to be running around going, what am I supposed to do? You won't know. So he says, congratulations if you figure out that you're a soul and you're not an ego. All the isms that we hold so tight to won't exist on the other side. This one's great. Number 21. For this reason I say, if the owners of a house know that a thief is coming, they will be on guard before the thief arrives and will not let the thief into their house and steal their possessions. As for you, be on guard against the world. Prepare yourself with great strength, so robbers cannot find a way to get you. Great physical advice. He says, put a security system on your house so that people can't break in and steal all your jewels and all your stuff. Good physical advice. Always better spiritual advice. Owners of a house. Who are the owners of a house? Physical people can own houses, but we all own a house. This is this thing. It is a body, but it's a spiritual body. Owners of a house know that a thief is coming. What would the thief be? Ego. Other people's ego. And what does that ego try to do? Get into you and rob you of what? Your good possessions. Yeah, your soul. But the features of the soul are your patience and your forgiveness and your mercy and your compassion and your wisdom and all that stuff. If you gain wisdom from this type of thinking, and then you go out in the world and people try to argue with you, no, that's not how it is, and you feel drained because of it, you just got robbed. I assure you this stuff is the most logical stuff ever. The Holy Spirit is 10 billion times smarter than the ego ultimately. All this stuff is about is working on fearlessness and patience and persistence and beauty and love and light and all that kind of stuff. You want somebody to argue with you and convince you that it's not that? No, this world is about misery and death and destruction and failure and disappointment and shame, and you should embody all of that. Don't let people rob you of your spirit. Your job is, quote, to be on guard against the world. Prepare yourself with great strength so that the robbers can't find a way to get you. What does that mean? Get up in the morning and focus on spirit. During the course of the day, focus on spirit. And the end of the day, focus on spirit. Prepare yourself with great strength. Otherwise, you're like walking out into a war. Your own mind and other people's minds are going to attack you, and they're going to look at you, and they're going to think you're physical when you're trying to be spiritual. And they're going to test your patience. They're going to give you opportunities for forgiveness. They're going to make you think you're going crazy. But if you're armed with great strength because you've got the Christ in you, you're good to go. Take this to the extreme. Jesus then, filled with Christ, goes and gets himself crucified. He knows he needs to do this, and he doesn't fight back. He doesn't go to the people that are killing him, hey, that's mean, you shouldn't do that. He knew what he was doing. He just showed forgiveness, and he shined the light back.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel if you want to stay up to date on all the new audio clips that we're going to be releasing and also all the new video clips that we've got coming up. A lot of exciting things planned, so stay tuned.